Welcome into another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host for the very first time, Ben Wolk with Dogs 24/7. I really can't believe Jordan and Kip are letting me do this. I can't believe that after a game like that I'm going to have to sit here by myself and talk to you all about what we just watched, because honestly, I think it was one of the more indescribable football games that I've ever watched. I just watched Kirby Smart's press conference. I'm sure that Jordan and Kip are going to have some awesome stuff for you from Tuscaloosa covering the game. What we're going to do is for the first part of this episode, we're going to talk about the game, what we just watched, as best as I possibly can. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what it means. I'm sure that there will be some comments in the comment section about just how you all are feeling about this one. I still can't quite totally wrap my head around what I'm feeling about this one. But after the break, we'll take a look at some of those comments potentially as well, and just take a look at what some of the narrative for this means for Georgia moving forward, because it was one of the crazier games that I've ever watched. I really don't know where to start, because in some ways I want to start with the miserable. In some ways I want to start with the what could have been. I think that where I have to start with this, and I'm not the type of person that likes to harp on the bad before I harp on the good. And keep in mind, for everybody that's listening to this, I'm just now reacting to this live. I don't usually do the live reaction shows. I usually leave that to Kip. He's usually of more sane mind than me in moments like this. So this is, not my wheelhouse. So I haven't had a chance to sit down, watch the tape, take a chance to, see how Georgia players and coaches have reacted to everything. That's when I'd feel most comfortable talking about this game. But let me just say it. I think this was on a lot of Georgia fans' minds throughout the course of the first half of the game, probably some now, even though I'm sure it was tempered to a certain extent. How the hell do you go to Tuscaloosa and let that type of first half happen? I don't know. Everyone's going to want to point fingers. They're going to want to point blame. I know that Carson Beck and Mike Bobo, they're going to catch a lot of it. I know I've already seen in the comment section a Kirby Smart overrated comment. I know that Kirby Smart is going to catch the brunt of it as well. And I get it. I don't know who you point fingers at, but I will say the fact that Georgia knew the magnitude of this game, the fact that this is the first time that Georgia is playing Alabama in Tuscaloosa in a game of this nature, with Nick Saban not as the head coach, and you play that type of first half performance, it's really unexplainable to me. I mean, the fact that we were looking up and it's 30-7 at halftime is one of the more shocking things. Look, you're talking to someone that predicted in the preseason that Alabama would win this football game, that predicted during this week that Alabama would win this football game. And in no way, shape, or form did I think that Georgia was going to get punched in the mouth the way that it did as early as it did against Alabama. It was one of the more just gut-punching, unexplainable first half performances. And really, quite frankly, it was the first 20-minute performance, because, I mean, it was one of those things where you're looking up, it's 28-0, and you got Kirk Herbstreit, and I'm watching on the broadcast like a lot of you all were. You got Kirk Herbstreit talking about, you got to go for it on fourth down in this situation. The fact that Georgia found itself on its own side of the field in a situation that it had to go for it on fourth down in the first half is one of the more mind-boggling first half results that I've seen in Georgia football in a long, long time. I'm sure a lot of people that are watching this were scratching their heads. I'm sure that a lot of people were screaming things. I'm sure hopefully some of y'all have your drinks of choice in hand for this, because I'm shocked the way that first half went, because we can touch on the good for a little bit as well, because there certainly was good. There was positive to take. The fact that we were sitting there and you could look up and say that Georgia was winning this football game in the fourth quarter, it was very short-lived. That's not something that I thought that you could have drawn up either, given the way that things were going. But I will say, why did things go awry so early? I think you have to give a tip of your cap to Jalen Milroe. I think that there have been a lot of Jalen Milroe haters. I don't think that many of them exist. I'm going to pull up the quick stat sheet on that real quick. He was 27 of 33, 374 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did have the 1 interception in the red zone that Dan Jackson caught off of the deflection. But other than that, was relatively mistake-free. He also rushed 16 times for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. Georgia did not get him on the turf. I think that a lot of times, you go back and look at the SEC championship game last year, he only rushed for about 30 yards. A big reason for that is Georgia got him on the turf a few times. And so that doesn't happen in this game. Just a lot of things that can't happen early against Jalen Milroe happen. You gave him some short field, and we'll get to Carson Beck and some of his mistakes here in a second. But I think that you do have to, at a certain point, pay your respects to Jalen Milroe because he is an unbelievably talented football player. I think he started out 11 for 11 for 149 yards and a touchdown. I mean, you can't get much better than that. And by the time that everything else was happening with his stat line throughout the game, you sort of felt like the game was in hand. Now, that wasn't the case, and we'll get to that here in a second as well. But just unbelievable result that you could be down like that in that game. And you look, I mean, again, I don't know. I wasn't in the room with Kirby Smart for his press conference, but it just felt to me early in the game, he was shell-shocked. It felt like post-game, he was still a little bit shell-shocked. And I think, to get to the point in that game that you're up 34-33 and for it to immediately go away, I think that's going to be the tough pill to swallow because you're not supposed to be back in a game like that. And the fact that you give him an explosive to a 17-year-old kid that you've been hearing about nonstop all week, I'm sure that's going to be infuriating a lot of folks on the defensive side. I will say I see Kev in the comment section says if Micah Williams doesn't jump off sides on Bama's first possession, we win the game for sure. That was Warren Brinson for the record, just to set the record straight on that. But I will get to some of the key plays that I think were turning point moments in that first half, especially that made it so difficult. But I do want to, before we get all into the doom and gloom, because there's going to be a lot of doom and gloom. It's a loss. The first loss of the year is always the most painful moment for most college football fans every calendar year. So I'm sure there's a lot of people going through it right now. But I will say there were some positive things to take away from that game. It was not Carson Beck's best performance. We'll say it straight up. He turned the ball over 4 times, 3 interceptions, including the one late that sealed it. I think the fumble is going to be the one that eats at him just because it lost a lot of time for Georgia late in that game when they were starting to move the football. But the fact that he finishes that game with 439 yards and 3 touchdowns and he gives them a chance late, they find the explosives somehow, some way. He hits one to Arian Smith short near the pylon. He hits one to Dylan Bell on a completely busted coverage. And all of a sudden, everybody is looking around saying, what in the world is happening? How did Georgia find its way back in this football game? The fact, Kirby Smart preached it all week long, resilience. He said pregame when he was talking to Holly Rowe, this is going to be a game that's won on a bunch of moments, not on a single moment. That was 100% the case. Unfortunately, I do think that Alabama got the best of most of the moments. That said, the fact that Georgia found itself in that game, I think that there's going to be a lot of people nationally paying a lot of credit and respect to what that means for Georgia. And like I said, we'll get into some of the national narrative stuff, what it means for the next, few months. But I do think that the fact that Georgia found its way back in this game, there were a lot of people that were asking whether Carson Beck should have been benched at halftime of this game. Straight up. If you're a subscriber to Dogs 24/7, if you're not a subscriber, go check it out. We're going to have great coverage all night long from Jordan Hill and Kip Adams. So we're going to give you a way better reaction to this game from people that are actually on the ground in Tuscaloosa than I am right here from my just knee-jerk reaction to things. But it's a game that Georgia should not have found itself in. And ultimately, it did find itself in. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of people giving Georgia credit for that. I think that Carson Beck showed that even though he gets punched in the mouth and he was not looking like the first-round pick that he's projected to be, and I think that at times he probably lost himself a little bit of money during the course of this game. He probably earned himself back a little bit of it there in the second half, and he's got a lot of chance to make it all back up the rest of this season. But I think that it was looking bleak. It was looking pretty dark for Georgia offensively. It was looking pretty dark for Georgia defensively in this game. So I do want to at least touch on, the positives there. I thought that Dom Lovett had a really, really nice night. He had 59 yards receiving. Arian Smith obviously had 132 yards receiving with the big explosive, but missed some opportunities early that probably would have weathered some of the storm there. I will say, I know after Georgia games, and I'm sure put it in the comment section. If you're a Bobo hater, say, put your fire Bobo comments in the section. I'm not telling you not to. But I feel like we have the tendency after these games to come in here and say what the offense didn't do well and what Mike Bobo could have done better and why the offensive game plan wasn't there. And I will say, I think that Georgia abandoned the run early and didn't hit some of the explosive shots that it took. But I think some of the opportunities were there. And clearly there were some great play calls there in the second half that gave Georgia a chance and even gave Georgia an opportunity to take the lead. I think that when you look at this game, it's one of the rare times in the Kirby Smart era that you say the defense had to do more in that game from start to finish that it did. Now, again, I'm going to play the other side where I'm going to give a little bit of credit to the Georgia defense because it made the stops that it needed to make late in the third, early in the fourth for Georgia to be in position, have a chance to win the game. But for them to have no response for Jalen Milroe early, and Kirby Smart has admitted this during post-game press conferences already. He said it at times to the TV broadcast during the game. They went empty with Jalen Milroe, and they were passing the ball out of that package, and it was not something that Georgia had really seen. I think that it surprised Georgia a little bit, and they didn't have an immediate response for it. I think he was able to run out of that. I think he was able to throw out of that, and because of that, again, Georgia was playing from behind the entire game. I mean, I was writing a rapid reaction article where I was talking about the fact that it was one of the more humiliating losses Georgia had ever had. And that by the time that Georgia had its first 3 and out because it had the penalty and it, had the early, didn't hit the explosive, had the early mistakes, I said, Georgia never got the ball back with a chance to tie the game. That ended up not being true because as the game played out, I had to rewrite the entire thing, or at least talk about the fact that I was going to have to rewrite the entire thing. But there were just too many of those types of things early in the game. All right. What we're going to do is I'm going to take a break, about 30 seconds. We're going to come back after the break, and we're going to just talk about what does this mean for Georgia, the national narrative. I'll take a look at some of the comments here as well. So if you have any thoughts on the game, I'm curious to get the pulse from fans about, what they feel like is the feeling around this team, because it's one of the more confusing games that I at least have watched in quite some time. All right. There again, I really do wish that Jordan and Kip were able to be on here, but I do know they were just talking to Kirby Smart. They were talking to Jalen Walker. I'm sure that they were talking to Carson Beck. So I know that you want to get that stuff from them. So that'll be at Dogs 24/7. If you're watching this and you're not a subscriber to Dogs 24/7, well, one, hit the like and subscribe button on the YouTube channel, but also subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and then also go subscribe to Dogs 24/7 as well, because you're going to get some behind-the-scenes content that you're not going to get anywhere else from Jordan and Kip tonight. Be sure of that. There was a chance that I was thinking all night long, all right, we're going to talk about the game a little bit in the first segment. Probably didn't do it full justice in terms of what I should have gotten to, in the first segment. I'm sure that if there was somebody else that was on here and we were able to talk a little bit more, credit to Josh Pate. Shout out 24/7 Sports, being able to talk, all by himself about these types of things, because I could certainly use Jordan and Kip here to bounce some things off of them around this game. So I would love to get some feedback from y'all in the comment section too, just like what y'all think, where y'all's pulse is, because I don't have a great feeling about where the Georgia fan base is, because there was a chance, and I was thinking about this all game long. All right, we're going to talk about the game in the first half. In the second half, let's talk about the narrative around all of this, because it looked like this could have been a really bleak, dark segment talking about Georgia football. I mean, this is it was down 28-0, down 30-7. Felt like the offense was sputtering. It felt like your first round quarterback was playing, it looked like Carson Beck had the yips at times. I mean, things were looking like, from a program standpoint, this was going to be one of the worst losses that Georgia football had experienced in a long, long time. And I think that for a big portion of this game, that's how I felt. That's how I think a lot of people felt. The resiliency, I think, is going to give Georgia a chance when it comes to national narratives. when it comes to the playoff picture. And I hesitate to even talk about the playoff picture in September because Georgia has so many losable games still on its schedule. And I think that you have seen enough blemishes on this Georgia football team this season to know that those losable games are truly losable. Now, I think that I do look at that second half and say, this Georgia football team showed me something. And Kirby Smart, I know he said this in the post-game press conference. He went into halftime not really sure. He said, I don't know what's going to happen in this second half. And I think a lot of times that you've seen Kirby Smart post halftime press conferences, or not press conferences, halftime speeches in the past against South Carolina last year, where he said, this is how the second half is going to go. This is what we're going to do. This is what they're going to do. And then that blueprint happened. I truly believe that he was so shell-shocked and they had been hit in such a way that they were not expecting, that they went in to the halftime locker room and he did not know what to tell his team because he did not know what to expect from that second half. And I think that what he told them was, you're going to learn about what you are. And I don't think anybody in that room probably truly believed in their heart of hearts that they were going to win that football game, but I think that they thought that they were going to give it a chance. And they did. And so I think that if that is the football team that Georgia is, if what we saw the last, say, 20 minutes of that football game is what Georgia's football team is, I think that Georgia is going to be A-okay. I don't think that Georgia has any issues navigating the, I think that you look at the three-headed monster of Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas, that stretch, and obviously Ole Miss feels like it's not as difficult of a game here now because of what happened with them in Kentucky today, but I think that Ole Miss is going to respond well to that game as well. So I think that Georgia looks at that three-headed monster and really needs to win two of them, but really could probably get away with only winning one of them. I think that a 9-3 Georgia, with the way that this game went, with the way that Clemson is playing, with the other wins that Georgia would be able to have on its schedule if it got through that gauntlet, I do think that from a playoff standpoint, this doesn't do a whole lot of negatively. Now, I was fully prepared to come on here and say the exact opposite, because when it looked like it was going to be, and pardon my language on this one, an ass beating, which is what it was for the first half, I thought that we were going to be coming on here and talking about how this was supposed to be the changing of the guard, the end of the Nick Saban era. The Kirby Smart can finally get the Alabama monkey off his back. Kalen DeBoer is the new guy in the conference, and Georgia is the best program, or so-called best program, in college football. They're supposed to go in and win this game. And I think that you saw enough rough around the edges early on in the season that everybody had their doubts. But Georgia's supposed to go in and fix the boogeyman that has been Alabama for so long. And I think the fact that it went the way that it went early is what makes it so explainable. And I think that there was such an opportunity in this game for it to go really, really wrong, because again, I realize, it's our Bama 24/7 site. Brett Greenberg, colleague of mine, good friend of mine, does an unbelievable job over at covering Alabama recruiting. He's obviously collecting Alabama recruit guys that are going to be at that game. He's collecting what their score predictions are going to be for the game. There's like 50 score predictions in there. One guy in the entire thing picks Georgia. Now, you might say, okay, yeah, we expect that. They're going on a game visit to Alabama. Absolutely, sure. I don't dispute that. But this is an opportunity in a game like that, where there are these preconceived notions about these programs from certain people around the country. You have an opportunity to completely change what that looks like from a recruiting landscape, just from, again, a national narrative landscape, and to lay the dud that Georgia laid that early in the game, I think just made it so inconceivable that could have been the way that this specific football game went. And so again, this segment could have been just bleak and doom and gloom, and that's sort of the narrative that everything was going with. Again, they rectified some of that by how they played in the second half. Offensively, how Carson Beck bounced back. I was ready as much as anyone to say, hey, just sit Carson Beck down, give anybody else an opportunity here, because it's just not going to be his night. And at the time, I wasn't necessarily saying I don't think it's going to be his year, but I was just saying it's not going to be his night. And he certainly proved a lot of people wrong. Again, probably salvaged a little bit of draft stock during that one as well. All right. Want to get a feel just for how certain people were feeling about the game. I think I called this one out earlier in the game. It's bust. Kirby overrated. It's probably a little bit of an overreaction, but I think that was definitely a sentiment that was happening early in the game. I think that the fact that this game happened the way that it did is shocking. And I don't sit here and say the sky is falling. The program is not going to be able to overcome this one. Kirby Smart can't get it done. Those things would all be ludicrous to sit here and say. I think that there needs to be a serious reality check from everybody in the building. I think it's been so easy in the past to be able to look and point and say, playmakers here, quarterback play there, defense didn't step up here, whatever, in certain pockets. I think there was enough issues across the board tonight. And quite frankly, I just think the inability to get a stop early in the game on Jalen Milroe is unacceptable. And then I think when you take that lead against all odds after everything that's happened for an explosive to happen, I realize I'm not pointing the finger at Julian Humphrey and KJ Bolden for not getting Ryan Williams on the turf. But when you give up that explosive play, you got to get him on the ground. You got to tackle him. That is uncharacteristic Georgia football. Just it is flat out not the way that you are accustomed to seeing Georgia football. Eric, he says, Arian dropping the bomb on the first drive was worse than Mikkel. That's Eric on X, Twitter, whatever you would like to call it. The bomb, the deep shot early, I think hurt just morale. I think it hurt Carson Beck's confidence. I think it probably hurt Mike Bobo's ego, because I think that he would have liked to come in and pound the rock a little bit more than they did. And they tried to take some shots and abandon the run a little bit early, and they had some opportunities that should have hit and didn't. So I'm sure that there was a level of disappointment there. But, I can't harp on Arian Smith too much there. I mean, again, situationally, it was tough for the nosebleed to happen so quickly early. But at the same time, Arian Smith has that big explosive down on, the left pylon to put Georgia in position to be in a one possession game. So I think I have to, give some credit there. He also caught the touchdown down there in the red zone. He was wide open, but he caught the touchdown down there in the red zone. Everyone had their fair share of mistakes in this one, so I'm certainly not going to point a singular finger at a certain player, but I do just think there needs to be a group-wide reality check about how a game like this could have even happened. On YouTube, we've got definitely could have played better for the rest of the game. Too many drop passes and interceptions. I mean, I think the turnovers were the killer. I don't think that there's any doubt that Carson Beck would like to have a few of those back. You can't. If you had told me at the beginning of the game that Carson Beck turned the ball over 4 times, I would not have even predicted that Georgia was in a one possession football game. So maybe that's something to hang your hat on a little bit. That Carson Beck, was able to put in one of his bigger clunkers from a mistake standpoint, and he still was able to play well enough. Playmakers were able to make enough plays, and the defense was able to hold up enough late in the third and early in the fourth to at least be able to make it a competitive game. And I hate that I have to say make it a competitive game, because Georgia took the lead. And that's what's crazy. It was so short-lived that Georgia was in the lead that it feels like Georgia was fighting from behind the entire time, and that they never, truly had a chance to win that game. But they did. And that's why I think that Jalen Milroe to Ryan Williams 75-yarder, it's not the giving up the catch that's the problem there. It's not. You just got to get him on the ground. You can't give that one up. Clint Jameson on Facebook, Dev could have had a bad game, but glad we came back. Absolutely. I think the resiliency there is definitely the positive that people are going to take primarily from this game. And yeah, Eric on X also, correction. I appreciate the clarification on Brenson, not Mikell, on that offsides penalty. Again, people are going to point to penalties. People are going to point to certain situations when it's easy to point to those things early in the game. And I think that those are definitely turning point moments when things unravel the way that they did. But just tough all around. I do think that comeback will help in the minds of really just the confidence of the football team. I think there was a chance for there to be such an ego shot that it's tough to come back from. But I also think that, the playoff committee, when they end up making these decisions, the fact that you go on the road, you took the lead late in the fourth quarter, it's probably going to look like an outlier first half when you look at the end of the season. Even if Georgia loses some games, you're probably not going to look at a first half where you say Georgia loses it by such a significant margin that it mattered that much. But Eric also says, our advanced thoughts and prayers are with the Auburn program heading into Athens next week. Yeah, you would think so. You would think so, though I'm sure that they're probably going to have a little bit of an ego shot as well. But Auburn never fares well in Athens. So yeah, I think that's going to be a tough one. Kev on X asks, thoughts on the defense from the first to second half, schematic adjustment, or players, especially safeties, just played better. That's a tough one to answer, Kev, because it's hard to take what happened in that final Alabama possession on that deep shot from Milroe out of your mind. And obviously, I know that that's not a safety that you're pointing at. I know that they got Julian Humphrey in isolated coverage. He lost the ball. He didn't make a play on it. He couldn't get him on the ground. KJ Bolden was late to get over there. He couldn't get him on the ground either. So it's hard for me to get that out of my head and just totally lay praise on the defensive performance in the second half. But I think, yeah, Georgia, this is not the first time that Georgia has gone into halftime and made really good second half adjustments on the defensive side of the ball that have impacted the outcome of the game. In this case, it didn't impact the final result, but it definitely impacted how competitive Georgia made it late in the game. And so, I think that the players obviously played better in the second half. I think Dan Jackson had some moments where he played great. I think that Malachi Starks probably has a couple of moments that he wished that he had back. But I think that all in all, aside from letting Jalen Milroe basically do whatever he wanted on the first 3 to 4 possessions of Alabama's football game, there was, a lot of positive to take away from Georgia's defensive performance. But again, that's where I go to what Larry Parker has to say here. That first half is 100% coaching. I'm inclined to agree. I think that this is one of the very few games that you will ever be able to look at me and say, I point to coaching as the reason why this game went the way that it went. And that's not to say that there was any one specific play call or one specific, adjustment or anything like that that needed to happen that didn't. It's just the fact that a first half can be as flat as it was. And I'm repeating myself now. People that are now 30 minutes into this episode and have listened to this, they're now hearing me say the exact same thing over and over again. The fact that you can fall flat in a matchup like this with the significance of this game is so unbelievable that I think you have to chalk it up to coaching. And I'm not, again, this is not a hot seat kind of conversation for me. You lost by 7 points at Alabama until I see a football program go toe to toe with Georgia and beat Georgia that isn't Alabama. It's not going to be a sky is falling. Obviously, I'm not talking Kirby Smart hot seat, but I know what people are going to do anytime Georgia loses a game with coordinators, with assistant coaches, position coaches. Someone's got to pay for this. Someone's head's got to roll. I don't think this was that type of loss, thanks to how they rebounded in the second half. I think that because in some respects, I think you have to give a nod to coaching there in the second half to say the fact that Kalen DeBoer almost pissed that game away. I mean, there's some Alabama people that are probably like, Nick Saban never would have let that happen. And again, that's not to take a shot at Kalen DeBoer, because the fact that he game planned the way that he did in that first half to make it go the way that it went, credit to him in winning his first big SEC game. That was a really important one for them to win and for him to win specifically. And so that's not to take away from anything that he did in the second half, but I think that, Georgia made a game of it when it shouldn't have been a game. And there is some level of coaching to that too, just in terms of having a team that your guys believe in it. All right. I think we're dwindling on comments here, so we're probably going to close down the show here in a second. I appreciate everybody who tuned in and watched. Like I said, subscribe to Dogs 24/7 if you don't already. I know it's a hard time to say, oh, I'm going to throw more money, but now is the time that you get in for the year. You're going to get great coverage from Kip and Jordan, and there's going to be some emotional stuff and content, unique stuff that I'm sure that they're going to get from post game. They're going to have great perspectives on this when we come back and have your next episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast early next week, once we've had a chance to regroup and actually dissect some things and not listen to some dumbass ramble about things for 30 minutes about a Georgia football game that I still don't think I have fully processed what that game is like. So again, appreciate all of you. With that, I am your host, Ben Wolk. I appreciate all of you for jumping on here For those of you that subscribe on YouTube, for those of you that subscribe on dogs247.com, we will be back early next week to talk more. And better luck next time, I guess, to Georgia football when they host Alabama in Athens next year.